In our last lecture, we explored the Iliad of Homer. The Iliad of Homer is certainly a great book by our definition. It has a great theme, the meaning of life. It is written in noble language, some of the most beautiful poetry in Greek, poetry that can be translated into English and still move the souls of true poets. And it does speak across the ages. For generations, it has been a source of inspiration for its literary value, for its historical content, and for its ethical teaching. And it can still speak to us today. It speaks to us not just about the meaning of life, but also about the Greek attempt to understand God, fate, and the meaning of good and evil. Our book now, The Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, represents the culmination of Greek thought with regard to God, fate, and good and evil. It is a work which could speak profoundly to men and women of the 18th century, such as Thomas Jefferson, who believed that from Marcus Aurelius we could compile a book on ethics equal to that of the New Testament. It is a work which is the product of the noblest mind ever to sit upon the imperial throne, a man consumed by day-to-day cares, who at the end of each day could step back and ponder once again the meaning of his life. Thus it can be a source of inspiration, of meditation, for the busiest CEO, if that CEO will let it speak to him or her. It has certainly inspired such noble entrepreneurs as Cecil Rhodes, who took a wealth in diamonds and endowed the Rhodes Scholarship. It has spoken to British men like Matthew Arnold in the 19th century, a poet who spent much of his life trying to reform the schools of England. So it is forever a call to duty. And that is what the life of Marcus Aurelius, the author of the Meditations, was: a call to duty, a call to carry out the meaning of his life as God had given it to him. He was born to wealth and privilege in the Roman society of the Age of Empire, that age in which the Roman Empire ruled a mighty domain stretching from the moors of Scotland today out to the Tigris and Euphrates river valleys of Iraq, from the North Sea of Germany to the sands of the Sahara. In that vast Roman Empire of the 2nd century A.D., one language carried you from what today would be the United Kingdom, all the way through France and Holland and Belgium and Luxembourg, down through Germany, into Switzerland, Austria, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, into Greece, into Turkey, on down into Syria and Lebanon, all the way through Jordan, Israel, into Egypt, on through Libya, Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and up into Spain. In other words, if you were to take that journey today on your own, it would require a dozen languages, and despite the euro, you'd still have to change your money probably 24 times. You'd need visas, and there would still be places you would worry about going. Isn't that true today, even if you could get in? Well, in those days, one language, Latin, would carry you anywhere. One coinage, the coinage of Rome, would take you anywhere in your monetary exchanges. And there was one law, the law of Rome, to guard your rights as an individual, your legal rights, your rights to property. This is nowhere better seen than in the 1st century A.D. in the book of Acts, in where Paul is arrested by a Roman officer for causing a disturbance. And he is going to be beaten, and Paul turns to the Roman officer and says, "You cannot beat me. I am a Roman citizen. That violates my civil rights." And the tribune can't believe him. He says, "Let me see your papers." Paul shows him the papers. And the tribune is immediately terrified that Paul is going to have him up on charges. Paul himself embodies the universal quality of this great empire, for he was born a Jew, educated as a rabbi, but spoke Greek fluently. As the educated language of that empire, in which Greek enjoyed an equal status with Latin, And Paul had studied the philosophy of the Stoics, just as Marcus Aurelius had done. And Paul was able in Athens to speak to the Athenians as a sophist, or as a philosopher, or as a professor. That is the world, then, into which Marcus Aurelius was born. His father died young, and Marcus was adopted, ultimately, by his uncle and guardian, the Emperor Antoninus. Antoninus Pius, he was called. Antoninus the Pious, the dutiful. So profound was his care for the Roman Empire, for all his obligations. Marcus wanted to be a scholar, a student, a person in search of wisdom, a philosopher. But I want you to understand the meaning of that term as Marcus used it. Philosophia, the love of wisdom. Philosophers for Marcus were not narrow academic specialists who taught recondite subjects like linguistic analysis. No, the model of the philosopher was Socrates, who spent his life and gave his life in the search of true wisdom, which is the wisdom to live your life. That was what a philosopher was, and that is what Marcus wanted to be. From his early youth, he studied. He also gave himself strong physical training so that he could endure, and even wearing out his young body by not eating enough but exercising too much. He wanted to be a philosopher and search for wisdom, but God called him to the imperial throne. And already his guardian and adopted father, Antoninus Pius, began in his last years. He was emperor from 138 to 161. In his last years, he began to rely heavily on Marcus Aurelius to share the burdens of ruling this vast empire. An empire that was based upon an ideal of liberty, an ideal that every subject had rights and privileges, and it was the duty of the emperor to protect those rights and privileges, to create prosperity, and to govern what was called one world. In other words, it was a world very much like our own. Prosperous. The ordinary citizen was more prosperous than he would be again, or she would be again, until the 20th century. With peace, but with a constant series of small wars, particularly in the Middle East, to prevent terrorism or to prevent attacks by the great rival power of Rome, the Empire of Iran, the Empire of the Persians. But they were very much subject to the domination of Rome. If Rome wished, Rome could have perhaps conquered the Iranians. So Rome was an unrivaled superpower, perhaps the only absolutely dominant militarily, politically, economically, and culturally power to exist until our own day, when America plays that role. So it was to lead this great empire, to govern it with justice, that Marcus was called in the year 161, when his father Antoninus passed away. He spent much of that life as emperor on campaign, protecting the borders of Rome. He lost his brother campaigning against the Germans. His brother had already carried out a campaign against the Iranians. And Marcus was then called upon to spend year after year along the Danube River, fighting against the Germans who were trying to come into this empire of peace and prosperity. And there, in lonely nights, in his tent, the fog creeping in, he would step back from all his duties of the day and write his magnificent Ta eis auton, thoughts for myself. His meditations, we call them, his contemplation. The first book was written at the end of his meditations. It is the second book that really began his thoughts. And in it he states, today you will meet somebody who irritates you. You will meet a busybody, you will meet somebody who is jealous of you, you will meet somebody who is treacherous, or you will simply meet a fool who wastes your time. You must not let them irritate you. You must remain serene in your fortress that is your mind and your soul. For the great theme of Marcus Aurelius is certainly the meaning of your life. But to get to that meaning of your life and how to live your life, Marcus begins with God and fate. Why must you let nobody irritate you? Is somebody going to irritate you today? You bet. Someone will certainly irritate me, probably already has, and will before I get back home. Maybe someone driving down the street. It may be somebody who comes up just to ask you a question like, oh, have you seen that article about you in the newspaper? Something to irritate you. Well, Marcus says, don't let them. Because, Marcus says, you must understand that God exists. And that person who comes to irritate you is part of that same God that is you. He too has that same divine spark. For Marcus Aurelius believes that the way to the meaning of our lives lies in first understanding that we have a soul. And that soul is what is crucial to us. And that soul partakes of the essence of God. That soul partakes of the essence that fate, through God, has decreed for each one of us. For each one of us has a destiny that is laid out. The concept of God in Marcus Aurelius represents the development of the theme we saw in Homer. The theme of Zeus, from being a capricious, lecherous king of the gods and men, into being supreme wisdom. In developing that idea of Zeus, the Stoic philosophical school had played a major role. It was a school of philosophical thinking that developed in Athens from the Stoa, S-T-O-A, the porch. Well, they didn't have fancy classrooms and officers, these Stoics. Their founder, Zeno, living in the impact of Alexander the Great in the latter part of the 4th century B.C., they simply taught out in a covered area where the rain wouldn't pour down upon them. And they taught a noble idea of God. God is the universe. And in the words of the Stoic thinker and poet Cleanthes, that God is all good, all beneficent, all knowing. That God is perfection. And that God has decreed for the universe all the stars that move, every creature in that universe. He has given to each individual a soul and decreed for that soul a fate. It is a monotheistic idea, an idea that paved the way for the ultimate triumph of Christianity. That is the God of Marcus Aurelius, a God who is all good, who can be called nature, who can be called providence, who can be called Zeus. So God is, and every creature has a fate laid down and a destiny to work out. And there is good and there is evil. All that God has decreed for Marcus Aurelius is good. And that's why you must not be irritated by this busybody, by this envious person, by this jealous person. Each one of them is doing good. Each one is a vehicle for doing good. And wisdom lies in understanding that. But you know what Marcus Aurelius says? Once we have understood that our purpose is to find the meaning of life, I don't mind if you decide God doesn't exist. It doesn't change a thing. And, you know, if you don't want to believe in good and evil, it doesn't change a thing. And if you don't want to believe in fate, it doesn't change a thing. It is, after all, Marcus says, a question of order or atoms. That is the word he uses. Do you believe that there is an order to the universe, an order to your life? Or is everything just a random collision of atoms, the way the philosopher Epicurus taught? Things just crashing together and coming about. It's either order or atoms, but either way, it is not going to change a thing about how you should live your life. And how you live your life, Marcus says, begins with understanding that all you can control is your mind, the thoughts you take with that mind, and the actions based on those thoughts. Your mind, the thoughts you take with that mind, and the actions based on those thoughts. No one, for Marcus, can control your mind. And that is a fortress into which you retreat, secure, calm, amidst all the storms of the world. So begin with that, and train that mind. Throw away your books, Marcus says early in the second book of his Meditations. You can go only so far with books. It is ultimately meditation and contemplation that leads you to this understanding. So we control our mind, and the only harm anybody can do to you is in your mind. It is not the action that somebody takes to you that harms you. It is your opinion of that action. Somebody takes away your job. They haven't harmed you because that job never was you. And woe to that person who identifies with their job. Someone takes away your car, robs you of it. They have robbed you of nothing. That car was never yours. You do not have control over property. You do not have control over your reputation. You do not have control over your wife or your children. Every night, kiss that wife goodnight and think she may be dead tomorrow. So what? She was never mine to begin with. God has called her home. No, somebody comes up to you and they say, "Oh, I'm so sorry your wife died." Well, they don't really mean that. But you must be able to say the same thing. "I am so sorry that my wife died," without really meaning it. Because that wife was never yours. That's the real test. It's everything, your job, your reputation. It's like a vase that you own that you might break. Well, what was that vase? In fact, God is like the pilot of a great ship, and he has let you out for a while on shore. He will toot the horn and you must go back. And don't complain, Marcus says, that you didn't get to stay as long as you wanted. So understand that. No one can harm you unless you form an opinion that you have been harmed. That is why Socrates was his great model. Anytus and Melitus, Socrates said, can kill me. They can never harm me. Anytus and Melitus were the men who had brought him up on charges. They could kill him. They could make the jury, convince the jury to sentence him to death. But they could only harm him if they made him do a wrong act. So that busybody, that thoughtless person, that jealous person, that envious person, they can only harm you if they make you respond to them in a harmful fashion. So that is the beginning of the understanding of what is good and what is evil. Everything that happens is good. God would not allow something to happen that was not good. And even if you don't believe in God, accept that everything is good, and that way you can live your life in peace and harmony. Because each one of us has a duty to perform. And for Marcus, he has been called to be emperor. That is his task in life. He would have chosen another life, to be a philosopher. But God has set him upon this imperial throne. And day after day he must deal with the cares of this great empire. He must fight wars against Germans. He must fight wars against Sarmatians. He must deal with a budget that seems impossible to balance. But that is his task, and he must do it as well as possible, for God has called him to that job. In other words, it is working out your life and finding meaning in the working out of that life that enables Marcus to deal with each one of those themes that we ask in how we should live. The meaning of his life is the life that God has given him. And that life will come to an end. His soul will not endure forever. He doesn't even have that consolation. When he dies, he will just turn into atoms and vanish. And his name will be remembered for a generation or two, no more. Achilles was utterly wrong in thinking that you can leave behind a reputation of glory. It is all meaningless, but do your job as well as you can while you are here. Truth. To Marcus Aurelius, God is truth. Zeus is truth. The world and the universe, that is truth. And his whole life is devoted to cutting away the extraneous, the fraudulent, all the ceremonies of imperial power. That is just pomp and circumstance. The truth is that you are a mere individual, an atom in the face of the great universe. Speak the truth, tell the truth, live by the truth. Absolute truth is always the foe of the absolute lie. So Marcus accepts these absolute values, and he raises for us a question that we will pursue all the way through our course. Are there universal values? For whenever I tell an audience or even tell a class, the only real reason I see for studying the great books is certainly not the specious notion that there are books every educated person should read. There's not a canon of great books that everyone should read. No. It is books that speak to you individually because they give you the values to live your life. And for Marcus, those values are the same as defined by Socrates. They are truth, justice, courage, moderation, and wisdom. Truth is that absolute truth, that is God. That some things are true in all places and in all times. That it is always right to resist evil, just as Dietrich Bonhoeffer knew. And that in your conscience you know what is true. Even if everyone else in the room, everyone else in the corporation, everyone else in the university, everyone says this is the way to do it. If you know it's wrong, then you have the courage to stand up for it because it is justice. And justice for Marcus Aurelius is treating others as you would have them treat you. Just that simple. Justice is doing unto others as they would do unto you and you would want them to do unto you. That is why you treat a peasant with the same courtesy and consideration that you do the most aristocratic of Roman senators. So justice is doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. Truth is knowing what that justice is. Courage is standing up for it. And moderation? Why, Marcus Aurelius is filled with moderation. Nothing in excess. Always understand that the other person may have a case. And he gives us very interesting formula to deal with people by. That fool is up there telling you a bunch of lies. Well, first of all, stop and say, is he really a fool or am I a fool? Is he the one who's lying or maybe I've got some lies in my mind? So let's listen to him. And then two, well, he's the fool. He's going to keep thinking that even though he's wrong. But maybe I can set right the matter that he is messing up so badly. Let me try to set it right. And if I can't, well, then just forget it. It's not going to disturb me anymore. Give me in the simple homily the courage to change things that I can change, the patience to bear things that I cannot change, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's just what Marcus tells us. So moderation and the wisdom to know what is justice, to know when courage is needed, the wisdom to do what is right. Now, as we go through our great books, our books that have made history, books that can change your life, I want to see if we don't find these in the literature of classical India, in the literature of classical China, repeated in our own day. But for Marcus, those values of truth, justice, moderation, courage, and wisdom are the way to live your life to find freedom. Because for Marcus Aurelius, education is ultimately freedom, the wisdom that sets you free. Free from the worries of this world, free from the fear of death. Why in the world should I fear death, says Marcus Aurelius? It is nothing but a passing away. To fear death would be to think I was wise in an area that I knew nothing about. So death is as natural to me, Marcus says, as is life. For Marcus, each of the themes that we considered under how we should live our life can be answered by this understanding of God, fate, and these central values. For Marcus, justice is the essence of his role as emperor, to treat everyone with regard and respect. And that is the duty, the responsibility that has been laid upon him. And you know, he seems in his meditations in 9 of the books as though he is this austere, automaton, withdrawn from the cares of the world, secure in his inner fortress. But in his first book, written when he had completed his meditations, there he expresses the deepest love for family, for his father who taught him what duty is, for his brother who had many faults, including being a drunkard and a womanizer. Marcus finds good things to say about him, and for his teachers who led him on the path to wisdom. He was a man who felt very deeply. His son was Commodus, and Marcus knew that his son was utterly unfit to be an emperor. But he still passed the imperial power on to him in the hopes that his teachers, his tutors, could guide Commodus in the way that would be right and just. And people criticized him. They said, "How can you turn power over to Commodus? Why don't you kill him?" And he says, it is like Zeus when asked about his son Mars, why he didn't kill Mars. He said, "I love him too much." So this was a man who felt very deeply love and the ties of family. Courage, honor, ambition. To Marcus, these were the false ideals of the world that lead so many of us astray. The desire to have power, to get power and to maintain it. And he would have said to Machiavelli, whom we will discuss later in our course, your whole book is about power, how to get it, how to maintain it. And you give all of these historical examples like Cesare Borgia, for example. Who are they now? People have to go to the appendix to your book and look them up. And even the greatest of names like Alexander and Caesar, what are they? They have all vanished and gone, and nothing remains behind. So be wary, Marcus says, of that false goal of ambition and honor that has led so many astray. Why should I feel proud, Marcus says, if I have killed some Sarmatians today? I didn't want to do it. They gave me no other choice except to wage war against them to protect my empire. And that empire, Marcus had as emperor the noblest vision of government. For he dreamt of an empire in which every citizen and every individual was free. Free to live their life as they chose. Free to follow their ambitions. I dream, he said, of one world in which all are prosperous, all can take care of their children, there is no war. Now that is a noble goal. And hence this man, in pursuit of that ideal, in pursuit of that duty, did not wash his hands of the world. Instead, he plunged right into that hard work of governing, of all those harassments that went with day to day, because that was his duty as God had given him, and he was going to do it as well as possible. Nature and the beautiful. For Marcus, every day was a wonder. Don't lie there in those bed covers, he said. Get up. The world is beautiful. God infuses it with all his glory. And he took a special pleasure in the final book of the Iliad, in the final lines of Book 1 of the Iliad, final lines of Book 1 of the Iliad, in which Zeus, at the end of a long and trying day, has a wonderful meal and lies down with his wife to sleep. Can there be anything better that God has made for us than good food, good friends, music, and a loving wife? There, nature. Nature is the world of beauty, the world that God has made. So get out of those bed covers, get on with your duty, and appreciate what is around you, says Marcus Aurelius. That is the meaning of my life, Marcus says. That is what duty has called me to be. And that is the ultimate purpose of education, Marcus says, to understand what your duty in life is. To find that task and to do it with all your might. Well, almost 700 years earlier, in India, that same concept of doing your duty as the meaning of life would lie at the base of the most eternal work of religion ever written in the mind of the great Gandhi, the Bhagavad Gita. And to that work of India we will turn in our next lecture.